So, Nick, it is such a pleasure to have you here. I'm fascinated by this report. I guess the first and most important question is, are these UFOs from outer space? What's your sense of them?
We still don't know. And that, of course, is why this report is just a preliminary assessment. There's going to be more work on this. The full resources and capabilities of the United States intelligence community are being brought to bear on this. There are lots of theories flying around, if you'll excuse the pun. Some people think it's Russia, some people think it's China, some people, even within government, think it may be extraterrestrial. We probably won't know until later this year because, as I say, this is just a preliminary assessment. The work goes on.
I mean, when you were at the MOD running this UFO project, was your gut feeling that these UFOs were from outer space?
We certainly didn't rule that out, but like the Pentagon, our conclusion was that there was no single one cause to all of this. And the report that you will have seen and that the media and the public have been talking about says, look, there are probably multiple things going on here. Some of these things may well be just a combination of misperception and radar glitch. Others might be attributable to some sort of weather phenomenon. But really importantly, what it did go on to say is some of the sightings clearly do involve a technology, advanced technology, and for example, two things that were specifically mentioned were radio frequency energy and signature management. So what that's saying is this thing, whatever it is, these objects, there's a power source, there's an engine, a propulsion system, and with the signature management, whatever it is taking some steps to try and make itself more stealthy so that we can't track it.
No, totally. Well, when I was looking through parts of the report, that's when I had my bingo moment. The truth is out there because, as you say, these objects didn't move in the way that we would expect with the wind. And also, obviously, the US Air Force is incredibly advanced when it comes to these type of things. Don't you believe that if these were foreign objects that were tracking, for example, for the Chinese military or the Russian military, they would be able to identify that they were for those countries?
Almost certainly, yes. I mean, I think at any given time, the intelligence community has a pretty good idea of what Russia and what China have, what the cutting edge of their technological advance in aerospace technology is. And one other important thing about this report is that it states that these objects are being tracked across multiple different sensor systems and platforms. So, for example, it's not just military pilots seeing these things, but it's radar operators tracking them, it's forward-looking infrared cameras filming them, it's satellites recording them. And now there's not much, this is probably in the classified part of the report. There wasn't much about satellites in the 9-page unclassified version. But this is all very interesting and somewhat disturbing. And as you say, if it was Russia or China, a lot of people in Congress are saying, come on, we'd know.
Totally, totally. Which leads me to suggest, and I think you agree with this, that the Ministry of Defence really needs to reopen our investigation into UFOs. Why did they close it in 2009? What was behind that decision, given they didn't come to a conclusion?
It was a mixture of defense cuts and, frankly, laziness. Just the feeling that they were getting several hundred reports each year, a lot of which were, to be fair, attributable to people seeing Chinese lanterns. And they were absolutely under siege from people making Freedom of Information Act requests. The MOD was getting more requests about UFOs at one time than any other subject. But now it's time to think again. And I think it was shameful, actually, of the MOD and the House of Lords the other day to say we're not going to re-engage on this. Because, look, if the world's most powerful superpower the United States, says, as they have clearly stated in this report, this is a flight safety threat and a possible national security threat, why on earth is the UK government not agreeing with that and saying, absolutely, we need to find out what's going on too?
Well, it could be the most important project they've ever undertaken. So when you were there, Nick, there were 12,000 sightings investigated by the Ministry of Defence, and approximately 5% of them remained unexplained. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, and the things that were of most interest to us were some of the things that actually you and I have name-checked in this chat. Sightings from pilots, sightings from radar operators, and what you described in your introduction. It's the cases where these objects are displaying speeds, maneuvers, accelerations that seem to go way beyond the cutting edge of anything that we've got. And I mean, in those circumstances, this simply must be seen as a defense and national security issue. And for the MOD to say, well, it can't be, therefore it isn't, and just let the bureaucrats win and say this is all too difficult, as I say, that's shameful.
Was there anything that you found out during your time at the Ministry of Defence that would lead you to believe that any of these UFOs could be from outer space?
We didn't have a smoking gun which proved it, but we certainly didn't rule it out. And some of the things that these UFOs could do, I mean, huge triangular-shaped craft, the size of, and this is according to military witnesses, a couple of football fields, just hovering, a few hundred feet in the air with little more than a low-frequency humming sound, moving very slowly, hovering, and then accelerating away to the horizon at high Mach speeds. Well, we sat down in MOD headquarters, and we sat down with Air Force officers and intelligence officers, and we said, well, this isn't the United States, this isn't Russia or China, what else does that leave? And there wasn't much, frankly.
I mean, party poopers would say, and they have said, this must be Russian or Chinese agents flying drones or hypersonic missiles close to Navy jets. Possible?
With some of them, just about possible. And, of course, one very good reason why the MOD should be back in the game. Because if it's Russia or China, my goodness, we need to find out if they've got those sorts of technologies. But I think, as the report says, there's no single neat solution to this. And through a number of different intelligence gathering techniques, and particularly, and this isn't an area that I can say much about because of the classification levels, but so-called measurement and signature intelligence, where you can look, for example, at radar, you can look at video, and you can start to make deductions about energy sources, engines, things like that. Look, the bottom line is, even with the cutting-edge technology, a drone is a drone. A missile is a missile, and we've got a pretty good idea what they look like and how they show up on our different sensor systems.
No, indeed. Well, you don't need to convince me, Nick Pope. I'm a believer. I think that extraterrestrials, I think they are. And I think it's great, and we need to be investigating, and we need to find out if these things are friends or foes. But some people call me crazy, but I believe it. I believe it. We're clearly not alone in this universe, are we? But what does my panel think? Nick, stand by. I'm just going to bring in Carol Malone, Benjamin Butterworth, and Neil Oliver. Carol, a little birdie tells me you're a believer in aliens too.
Total believer. I'm just really disappointed. I've never seen anything myself. But what I wanted to say to Nick was, you must have been aware that the most convincing sightings were in Rendlesham Forest in the 1980s. That was sightings over a period of 3 days.
Absolutely, yes, before my time, but I did a cold case review of it, and you're absolutely right. 3 consecutive days, multiple military witnesses, including the deputy base commander, and this thing wasn't just lights in the sky. Something briefly landed, and the defense intelligence staff subsequently looked at the landing site, and they found radioactivity levels there were assessed as significantly higher than the average background. And it was tracked on radar as well. So an absolute multitude of evidence there. And the MOD's declassified and released the file to the public, or most of it.
Could I just ask you, I want to ask you a question about that. Do you believe any government would hide information about UFOs?
Yes, I think they would. I mean, firstly, these UFO programs, whether they're in the UK, the US, Russia, China, wherever, tend to be embedded in the Air Force or in the Ministry of Defense, so inherently secretive organizations. But I think there's a feeling that if there is a technology behind these craft, whatever it is we're dealing with, the nation that first acquires that technology will be in a very strong position. And that's a big incentive to keep things secret.
Okay, Benjamin Butterworth, are you a believer?
I'm not a believer.
Oh, there's a surprise. Party pooper of the night. Why not? How do you know?
I mean, it's just completely implausible. I mean, I'm quite amused that this is in a section called Uncancelled. How 2021, the aliens have been cancelled before they've even turned up, it seems. Look, I have to ask you, because I'm really not, and, you know, Dan and Carol on the panel are intelligent people, but there are a lot of people out there who it's no coincidence that their idea of this activity is exactly what they've seen in films and in TV shows. Oh. Do you not think that basically all of these
Slag
people...
off the public again, okay. There you go.
Yeah,
we're all stupid. We're all stupid. It's the only excuse why we voted for Brexit, you know,
1,200
why we're anti-lockdowns, why we believe in aliens. We're stupid people.
Hang on. Well, let me ask the question. Are these people not people that just have watched too many late-night movies?
Oh.
No, they're not, because, of course, many of these visual sightings, as I say, are backed up by radar, satellite, forward-looking infrared camera mounted on the military jets. But the other thing, I do take your point about science fiction, but it's chicken and egg, and a very good example of that. I mean, it's not people reporting UFOs who've watched too much sci-fi. It's sci-fi filmmakers who go out into the UFO community and listen to what things are being reported and then reflect it. Chris Carter, for example, before he created the X-Files, famously went around for years at UFO conferences, just sitting at the back and taking notes. So actually, art imitates life here, not the other way around. Interesting.
Neil Oliver, are you a believer?
I'm just completely open-minded about these things because I obviously, just a simple human level, I love the mere possibility. I just like to be open to the idea that there is intelligence out there and that we've, you know, possibly had a brush with it, or much more than a brush with it. I'm fascinated by so many aspects of it. I remember years ago when there were lots of sightings over central Scotland, you know, lights in the sky and things moving very, very quickly. And you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but I think there was talk of a supersonic aircraft called Aurora. That Jane's Book of Planes, you know, the aircraft Bible, you know, they said, if you take this to US military and say, have you got this or not? It's in their interests to leave the uncertainty out there, because you wouldn't want to disavow the notion that you've got very advanced technology, so that the US military would always just refuse to confirm or deny. And I think Aurora was this like Mach 8 creation that would have flown from London to Sydney in an hour and a half or something. It's an amazing aircraft. And I think it's always interesting at the moment when the tectonic plates are shifting around between the US, China in the ascendant, Russia doing whatever Russia's doing. It's probably in lots of people's interests to allow the opposition to think that they might have fantastic futuristic technology, whether it's extraterrestrial or not. I think it's possibly, maybe it's just in there with the game playing that goes on. But when it comes to, are we alone? Is there extraterrestrial life? I don't really see how you can be anything but open-minded.
Nick, final word to you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yes, at any given time, certainly there'll be secret prototype aircraft. And I well remember the rumours about Aurora, things that the public won't see for many years. But I think that might be a factor with some of the public when people investigate this in civilian UFO research groups. But within government, we tend to know who has what. And of course, those things tend to be test flown fairly exclusively in restricted military airspace and places we know about. So it explains some of the sightings for sure, but again, not all of them. So Yeah, interesting times for this subject, absolutely out of the fringe and into the mainstream.
Well, I love it, and we're going to keep talking about it here. Nick Pope.